Most guests completely miss this detail at Disney, and it's one of my favorite things to talk about. Have you ever noticed that while it's named Pop Century, it only contains the years 1950 to 1990? Well, there's a very good reason for that, and that reason is that Disney abandoned the other half of the resort. Yes, literally abandoned it. And this is the story of why Disney abandoned Pop Century for over a decade. Many Disney fans are shocked to find out that Disney abandoned anything, let alone a resort, but not me. I consider myself the self-proclaimed queen of all things abandoned Disney. It truly is one of my biggest passions, and honestly, it doesn't surprise me at all that Disney would abandon a resort, because they abandoned almost everything. They've abandoned 2 theme parks that are sitting there rotting, they've abandoned many rides, they've abandoned resorts, they've abandoned everything. Hidden all across property are these abandoned things, and today we're covering one of my favorites, and that is Pop Century. But to understand why Disney abandoned Pop Century, we need to go back in time, to the early days of Walt Disney World. Because when Walt Disney World was being built, there were a couple of critical things in Walt's mind. 1, he wanted it to be a vacation kingdom, more on that in a moment, and 2, he wanted it to be accessible to everyone. The vacation kingdom meant that they weren't just getting day guests, which was a lot of what they saw in Anaheim at Disneyland. They wanted guests to stay for longer periods of time on their property. And to achieve that, they needed to build some Disney resorts. The other piece that was so critical to Walt was that those Disney resorts that they built were accessible to everyone. That means at any price range. So in 1971, when Walt Disney World opened, it opened up with 3 resorts that year. The first is the Contemporary Resort, the second, the Polynesian Resort, and the third, the much more affordable Fort Wilderness Campground.
In Walt Disney World, there is another wilderness set aside for the use of guests who enjoy the out-of-doors, the Fort Wilderness Campgrounds.
And while Walt had already passed by the time these resorts opened, Disney really achieved what he wanted, that there were a variety of options for people to stay at any budget. 2 years after Walt Disney World opened, Disney opened up their 4th resort, the Golf Resort, located right near Magic Kingdom. But for the next 10 years or so, there were no new resorts that opened up. That is until Michael Eisner took over the Disney company as the CEO in 1984. He vowed to grow and transform the company that was struggling at the time into a major player and entertainment giant in the industry. And that meant really achieving one of Walt's initial goals to be a vacation kingdom. Michael Eisner wanted Walt Disney World to be a multi-day experience. And to make that possible, he needed to focus on the Disney hotels. One of his first moves with the Disney hotels was to rename the golf resort to the Disney Inn. He hoped that this would make this resort appeal to more people and not just those who wanted to play golf on property. And if you're thinking, what's the Disney Inn? What's the golf resort? Today, it's known as Shades of Green. It was renamed to that in the 1990s and it is now an offering for military families to stay at a discount. But other than that rename, Michael Eisner wanted to expand the hotel offerings even more. In 1988, he opened up the Grand Floridian Resort on a site that had been planned for a Disney hotel for years. 1 year after, he opened up the first moderately priced Disney resort, Caribbean Beach. This was also the largest resort that Disney had ever built. And these resorts really cemented Disney's confidence in dominating the Central Florida hotel industry. From 1990 to 1992, Disney opened up 5 new resorts. The Swan and Dolphin Resort, the Yacht and Beach Club Resort, and what is now known as Old Key West. They also opened up 2 more of the moderately priced resorts, which is Port Orleans Riverside, then known as Dixie Landing, and Port Orleans French Quarter. Each of these hotels brought something new to the Disney resort lineup. They had their own distinct design and theming, and they appealed to a wide variety of guests. The moderately priced resorts had food courts and large, high-capacity pools that appealed to guests who are more on a budget. These moderate resorts really helped usher in a whole new breed of Disney resort type. Because while Disney was capturing guests at the top end of the budget and at the middle end of the budget, they were missing one category, and that was guests on a lower budget. If they weren't staying at the Fort Wilderness Campground, they were staying off-site, because just like Disneyland in Anaheim, Walt Disney World had hundreds of cheap budget hotels opening up right around the property. And Disney wanted to take their market share of these budget resorts. So in April of 1994, Disney took a gamble and opened up a new budget resort, today known as a value resort, and that is the All-Star Resort. And this new resort had 3 distinct sections. The All-Star Sports section opened up first in early 1994, and at the end of the year, All-Star Music opened. 5 years later, in 1999, All-Star Movies would finally open up. And what Disney was finding was that these rooms were very popular. The resorts were at capacity most of the time, and it got them thinking. Because in the time that the All-Star Resorts opened, they had opened up a bunch of new resorts. The Wilderness Lodge opened up in 1994, the Boardwalk in 1996, Coronado in 1997, Animal Kingdom Lodge in 2001, but Disney realized that the budget resort was a key category. After years of success and full rooms at the All-Star Resort, Disney announced a new resort would be opening up, one to coincide with the turn of the century. Initially, the resort was unnamed, but it soon came to be known as Pop Century.
None more so than at Disney's Pop Century Resort. If there is a Main Street at this next resort, it should be appropriately named Memory Lane. The Pop Century Resort is a nostalgic journey through bygone eras. And the magic starts just outside Orlando, Florida, in Lake Buena Vista. The Pop Century Resort, one of Disney's newest and one of its most colorful hotels, takes a quirky look at American pop culture and is built with the budget-conscious traveler in mind. The rooms at the Pop Century Resort are nice, clean, and neat, with a decor that reflects the decade of the building you're in. Most have twin full-size beds and separate bath, so there's plenty of room for the whole family. The buildings are designed like motor lodges of the past and surround either manicured gardens or sparkling pools. Disney has created a resort that gives its guests a chance to reminisce and hang out on the street corner of yesteryear.
And the resort really was modeled after the All-Stars. It planned to have over 5,000 rooms, just like the All-Stars. It was going to have large, oversized props, just like the All-Stars. And also, just like the All-Stars, this resort was intended to be broken up into different sections. The first section was the legendary years, and this would cover the year 1900 to the 1940s. The second section was the classic years, which would cover the 1950s to the 1990s. In between these two sections was a large lake in the shape of an hourglass with a bridge connecting the two called the Generation Gap Bridge. The legendary years and the classic years were intended to be mirror images of each other. That meant that each would have 2,880 rooms. Each would have one large pool and several smaller quiet pools. There would be the same number of buildings, and there would be the same big hall. This hall was intended to have the reception area, a store, and the food court. And Disney began construction of both resorts. They focused on the classic years, finishing that for the phase 1 piece, and they were in progress building the legendary years. Over at the legendary years, they constructed the Great Hall, which was going to be called Legendary Hall, and also constructed 2 of the 1940s decade buildings. And then everything changed. Because on September 11th of 2001, a terrorist attack struck the United States of America. And on the many sweeping impacts this had on the nation, one that affected Disney specifically was a huge drop in tourism. Phase 1 of Pop Century was originally planned to be open in December of 2001. But because of 9/11, Disney saw a huge drop in the numbers of people attending their parks. Magic Kingdom dropped by 700,000 guests from 2000 to 2001. Epcot dropped by 1.6 million, MGM Studios and Animal Kingdom both dropped by 600,000. Basically, Disney did not need a new resort to open up and staff when they weren't even filling up their other resorts. So Disney postponed the official opening from December to March. Originally because Disney had concerns about the partially completed property. The main hall wasn't quite yet complete, the pool wasn't complete, and the legendary years still had a lot of work to do. By waiting until March, at the very least, they could finish up the classic year side and focus on the legendary year side next. But soon, Disney announced yet again that they would delay the opening of Pop Century. But this time, it wasn't just pushed a couple of months, they didn't announce a new date. Guests who already had reservations for the Pop Century Resort were transferred to other hotels. And then, Pop Century just sat there. No new work was done on the legendary year side, the classic side didn't open, and it sat like that for 2 years. Until 2003. On December 14th, 2003, Pop Century Classic Years finally opened up. Guests could experience the 1950s to the 1990s, staying in the brand new buildings, experience the classic hall, the hippy-dippy pool, the food court, and more. They had the option of a pool view, a parking lot view, or a resort view, kind of. Because the resort view, while they could see the classic year side, was actually really a view of the ghost resort, the abandoned resort. The legendary years, because Disney hadn't done any further construction on this resort. And right across Hourglass Lake, this resort was blatantly easy to see. That huge legendary hall, it was complete on the outside. They had the giant decade numbers from 1900 to 1940s in place. 2 of the buildings were constructed, and while Disney did try to obstruct some of the view, they were not super successful. They had opened up the Generation Gap Bridge that spanned over Hourglass Lake, but as you walked across it, you would just hit a dead end with tall, thick plants obstructing your view of the resort. And all that was great if you were standing at this level, but guests who were staying on the upper stories of the buildings could easily see the abandoned part of the resort. But did this bother Disney? Clearly not that much, because they didn't do anything about it. This was so frequently talked about on message boards, pre-social media age, during this time. And basically the consensus was either finish this resort or demolish this eyesore. And for years, Disney did neither of those things. They just let it sit there. Cut to October of 2005. Disney is testing a new room type, family suites, at the All-Star Music Resort. Yet again, they wanted to reach a new category. They were already reaching the budget-friendly guests, but they wanted to reach families that were larger than 4 that needed more space in their rooms. According to rumors, if the test at All-Star Music was successful, Disney would resume construction on the legendary years and turn it into a full family suite resort. Unsurprisingly, when the family suites opened up at All-Star Music in 2006, they were a huge success, and guests said, yes, finally, the legendary years will be complete. However, from 2006 to 2010, there was no further construction, and the resort remained abandoned. But finally, on May 12th of 2010, Disney announced plans. Oh, sorry, no, not to finish the legendary years resort. They were turning that into a brand new resort. This resort would be named the Art of Animation Resort, and rather than celebrate 1900 to 1940s, it was celebrating 4 iconic Disney films: The Lion King, Cars, Finding Nemo, and The Little Mermaid.
In just the right light, in just the right setting, a simple drawing and a splash of color come alive in a landscape of imagination. This is Disney's Art of Animation Resort, your gateway into an incredible realm of Disney and Disney Pixar animated films. A place where you'll actually become part of the artistry behind the magic. Here you'll step into the storybook landscapes of 4 animated films: The Little Mermaid's Under the Sea Grotto, the lush Pride Lands of The Lion King, the big blue world of Finding Nemo, even the quaint little town of Radiator Springs from Cars.
And this brand new resort would sit right on top of where the legendary years was. But here's the thing, as Disney started to redevelop this site, they already had a couple of buildings that were there. So rather than demolish these and all the money they put into them, they decided to use them. What was going to be the Legendary Hall was pretty easily retrofitted into the Animation Hall that's open at Art of Animation today. It has the exact same layout and footprint that the Classic Hall has, just with a new theme. But there was a bit of a hitch, because remember the other 2 buildings they constructed, the 1940s section? Well, during Disney's testing of the family suites, they realized that these should have interior hallways. They didn't want to do the motel style anymore. But the problem was the 1940s section had already been built in that motel style with the open air hallways. So Disney decided to figure it out. They built 1 more building in the style of the outdoor hallways, and the rest of the resort would have interior hallways. As a result, the Little Mermaid section is the only section of this resort that has those outside hallways. This really is one of the discrepancies that allows Art of Animation to be called a value resort when many times the prices are much more moderate based or even deluxe. Now Disney of course never announced why they bailed on the legendary years and built Art of Animation instead, but of course me and many others have ideas, and here they are. The first is that Pop Century was announced in 1999 when people were really excited that they were experiencing the turn of the century. They were sad to say goodbye to the 20th century and excited for the new 21st century. So what a perfect way to celebrate those iconic years. But now it had been 12 years since the turn of the century, and people just weren't really thinking about it anymore. And even more so, there was not that many people who were born in the 1900s to the 1940s who were even visiting Disney parks. So you could theme the resort after sort of a forgotten time, or you could theme it after iconic Disney movies. Most likely, decision makers at Disney felt that Art of Animation was going to be a much more popular theme for families and guests looking to visit Disney than the legendary years. Now, there was a bit of a problem with this, and that is that Pop Century was supposed to span a full century, and it does not. It only covers 50 years. And I think that Disney just hoped that people wouldn't notice that, and honestly, people don't really notice it. While I jokingly call it Pop Half Century pretty frequently, I don't hear almost anyone talking about this. And that's why they need to watch this deep dive to understand more about the history of this resort. Now, if you visit Pop Century, are there any other remnants that you can see to the old Legendary Years section? Well, of course, at Art of Animation, we have the original building that was the Legendary Years Hall, and we have the Little Mermaid section. But there are a couple of other little details at the classic side. First off, the fact that it's called the classic side, because the classic side doesn't really mean anything if there's not a legendary side to kind of balance it out. Disney has removed most of the traces of the classic year side, and it's just branded as Pop Century, but there is one that you can see as you walk into the Classic Hall. You can see a sign that says Classic Hall, and this is really one of the last tributes to the fact that there was supposed to be a different countering Legendary Hall. Other than that, because the resorts were intended to be sort of two distinct sections, there really are so few traces left. Another one is the fact that the lake in between Art of Animation and Pop Century is in the shape of an hourglass, and it has the Generation Gap Bridge because this was really supposed to represent a changing in dynamics and a changing in generations. In my mind, this history makes Pop Century even more interesting as a resort, and this really sums up the story of why Disney abandoned Pop Century. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching this video. I have been loving these deep dives so far, diving into forgotten pieces of Disney history, whether that's abandoned Disney, the backstories of rides, animatronics, or more. I have so much more to share with you, and I hope you will join me next week for our next deep dive. But for now, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video, and I will see you guys later.